Nightmares. Well, I've had a few, and let me tell you a couple, and you can decide for yourselves which was the most nightmarish. I remember once I awoke to find a child standing beside the bed in the glow before dawn. For a moment I thought it was our daughter or our son, and then I gathered it was neither, and I very much didn't want to see its face. Instead, I managed to wake up for exactly long enough to be aware that I was immediately falling asleep again, back into the same dream. This time I was terrified and found myself struggling to use my voice to scream, but it was out of my reach. Somehow I succeeded in establishing contact with it and emitted the kind of cry which feels as though it's being produced at a great distance, and I lurched awake. I was lying next to Jenny, my wife, in a night far darker than the one in the dream. These were not circumstances in which I wanted to be alone with what had just happened to me, but I resisted the urge to waken Jenny so as to share it with her. After some indeterminate time, I shook off enough of the lingering sense of the dream to be able to sleep until our son roused me. This time it was near enough to dawn that I could see he was wearing a Halloween mask, a skull. Well, if you're the son of a horror writer and a fan of horror movies, that's not an especially odd way to wake your father up, and even when you're maybe 8 years old. But at that point it wasn't a sight I really welcomed. After all, I just had a bad nightmare, I told him, and I'd appreciate him taking off the mask. When he only stood there beside the bed, I reached out and took the mask off. Beneath it was another mask, or perhaps a face that looked like one, and I realised the figure standing over me wasn't my son after all. The following day I was walking to the nearby shops with him and his sister, and I felt able to talk about this series of dreams. Last night, I told them as we went into a florist shop, I had the worst nightmare I've ever had in my life, and as I spoke I knew that mentioning it would cause it to begin again. And it did. And eventually, finally, and perhaps for the first time during the whole sequence, I managed to wake up. I remember going to London to attend a preview of a film, and after which, after having had some conviviality and a get-together, I missed the last train home and stayed overnight in a hotel. There I had a series of bizarre dreams of which I recall very little, other than a walk through an industrial ruin whose outlines and crepuscular gloom recalled Piranesi at his most oppressive, though in the dream I was unable to recall the artist's name. I woke at 6:20 in the morning, for some reason thinking Pizza Valdemar and planning to write that down in case I could use it somewhere, but I was unable to move even sufficiently to see whether my room had a bathroom attached, which I couldn't remember. As I struggled to move, I heard someone breathing near me, and it occurred to me that this might be my own body into which I had somehow got to fit myself, which proved impossible. I tried to move and tried to move and tried to move, and after a considerable time I woke in my bed at home. I'd never been to London at all. And one night I found myself in a Middle Eastern country, ruled or at least held in thrall by an old railway engine on the front of whose boiler was a face of which I recall only the eyes, large and round and unblinking, but because they were composed of the same brass as the boiler, only gradually distinguishable. Another reason for the people to be nervous in that country was that this latitude gravity was apparently much greater, so that they lived in fear of being crushed by objects falling from everywhere else in the world. I made my way homewards by the immigrant route, or at least a photograph of it, the Reaper Barn, a road lined with poplars. Was that a dream or a nightmare? Whichever, I enjoyed it, and places like that are where I spend quite a lot of my time. But writing about these nightmares, as I did many years ago, I remember I had a dream almost immediately afterwards. I was in an alley, one side of which was walled off by backyards, the other by a large unlit church. It was almost pitch black, but I could see that the church door was open and distinguished stone steps leading up into darkness beyond it, and I very much didn't want to climb them. Then a woman's voice asked if she could help me, and because her voice was coming not from the backyards but from the church, I hurriedly awoke. That may have been more or less a standard nightmare, but for me at any rate, but later I was a koala bear, which had somehow escaped from a Disney film about an organisation that wanted to destroy the world. What pursued me up a tree, however, was a baby. And when I managed to waken, yes, really waken, no question this time, I saw something behind my eyelids. I can best describe it as an aperture about the size of the start of a migraine, and I thought, I first dreaded actually, related to a migraine. But it was brighter than the rest of my vision, and it showed me with absolute clarity the sight of a young girl dancing. She stayed in focus for about 10 seconds, and then she vanished.